I always wanted to try to honor my father's passions in life, and wanted to start the endowment for Indigenous students because I know how my father loved the cultures, the spirituality, the care for the planet, if you will. My father was always very upset that there was very poor treatment, to put it mildly, of Native Americans and Indigenous cultures. And I felt in his name that a tradition of helping their own culture, their oral traditions, their own care for the planet, their own practices, everything, that it should be honored, and they should have a chance to be able to use the wonderful communication tools we have now in film, television, media, technology is the most wonderful way to be able to carry forward to the new generations coming.
Well, hello. How nice to have all of you here today. It's so wonderful to be able to actually have people sitting in these chairs. It was a long, lonely 2 years that generally the only people around, it seemed like, were me, the maintenance staff, and some very lonely pigeons and squirrels. So it's been thrilling that we've been back full since August, but so many events like this one that we had planned 2 years ago just couldn't happen until now. So we're thrilled to have you here. I'm Elizabeth Daly. For those of you I don't know, I'm the Dean of the School of Cinematic Arts, and we're delighted to have you in our house. And we're here today to celebrate the legacy of a legend in our industry. Gary Cooper is undoubtedly one of the best known and I would venture best loved talents of American cinema. You know, obviously you know his films very well, The Virginian, A Farewell to Arms, Mr. Deed Goes to Town, and of course, High Noon. He played a wide range of characters. They always seemed to be the strong, silent types, men of actions, activists, problem solvers. He also chose films that had something to say about America's values and her aspirations. He was nominated for 5 Academy Awards for acting, won 2 for High Noon and Sergeant York, as well as an honorary Oscar for career achievement. It was the kind of career that shows up on every syllabus in every American film history class. So today, we're here to celebrate the legacy of Gary Cooper, but also the Gary Cooper Endowed Fund for Student Support, which was established at the school in 2005 by Maria Cooper Janis, his daughter. And it has benefited, yes, and it has since then benefited students who come from communities that are truly underrepresented in our industry, especially Native American students. And this being the Festival of Books, of course, we're also here to celebrate 2 wonderful works on Gary Cooper's life and career. They're both going to be available outside for purchase after the film. The first is Maria Cooper Janis' book, Gary Cooper Off Camera, A Daughter Remembers. And second, Glenn Frankel's High Noon, The Hollywood Blacklist, and the Making of an American Classic, one widely read in many of our courses. They will both be available to assign their your purchases for you after the film. But this being the School of Cinema Television, of course, I'm very glad that we're going to begin the screening with one of the most enduring films of the American canon, High Noon, which is perhaps the one most associated with Cooper's remarkable career. Now, I don't know about you, but I think most of us remember the first time we saw High Noon. I certainly do. And I think even those of you who are far too young to remember when it was first screened, it's been on so many different venues that everybody I ask, I say, do you remember when you first saw it? They always do. So this is going to be a wonderful chance to see it on the big screen, screened as it was meant to be seen. And I also now want to take an opportunity to thank the panelists who are going to be with us today to discuss this film's legacy. We'll have Amanda Foreman, whose father, Carl Foreman, co-wrote the script for High Noon. Our two authors, Glenn Frankel and Maria Cooper Janis, and of course our moderator, Pete Hammond of Deadline Hollywood. We're always delighted when we can have Pete with us. So thank you, Maria, Amanda, Glenn, and Pete. And I also want to just say a thank you to the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, and especially to Iron Mountain, who is our sponsor today. Iron Mountain, unbeknownst to many people, does a great deal of preservation and trying to keep the archive of Hollywood. So we're very appreciative of their support on this and many other things that we do to recognize the legacy of Hollywood. So thanks much for being here. And now, Pete, it's all yours. You want to come and introduce the film?
Well, thank you, Dean Daly, and happy to be here. Always happy to be here at USC. I was born in LA, so this isn't far for me. And although the traffic coming in here with the Festival of Books was unusual for a Sunday here, but nevertheless, I'm so glad you all got in here and can see this movie. How many have never seen High Noon? Okay, so you will really remember the first time you saw High Noon. The rest of you have and know what a classic this is, and different than any Western, certainly, I've seen. And when you have Carl Foreman, this extraordinary screenwriter, producer who's done so many movies, including one of my all-time favorites, The Guns of Navarone. I just love that film. And The Bridge on the River Kwai and so many things. When you have Fred Zinnemann as a director, multi-Oscar winner, of course, with one classic after another here directing it. When you have Stanley Kramer producing this, a man known for film after film of social issues and social justice in his long career too. And when you have Gary Cooper starring in it, you know that it's going to be a classic. But I don't think they knew that when they were making this film. And that's the interesting thing. The film takes on a life of its own, and it certainly took on a life of its own. As in our panel discussion afterwards, we're really going to talk about this, so I don't want to go into a whole lot on it. But the Hollywood blacklist was just rearing its ugly head as this film was being written by Carl Foreman, as it was being made. And it's quite the story of the blacklist as well. And as Carl Foreman, who had been a communist but renounced that, but nevertheless got caught up in this whole thing and had to testify without naming names, and all of that going on, as he was writing this, it changed. And I'll certainly let our panelists talk more about that. But the whole tenor of the film, High Noon, changed as he was writing it, and it became an allegory, really, for what was going on with the Hollywood blacklist, certainly Hollywood's darkest period. I think this film is so timely now because we've been going through a different kind of period with echoes of that. And, so it's really interesting to see it in light today and see how it's held up and how important this film is. It's not only a great movie and it's a real yarn and it's real entertaining to watch, but it's also a very important movie. And it won, as Dean Daly said, it won 4 Academy Awards, was nominated for 7. It won Best Actor for Gary Cooper, his second Oscar. The score by Dmitri Tiomkin, which can't be beat, and the song "Do Not Forsake Me," you will be singing that when you leave today because it is played incessantly through the movie. There's a whole story about that too, but it is so perfect for the movie, but it keeps popping up during the film as well. And Elmo Williams' editing here also won the Oscar. Carl Foreman was nominated, the picture was nominated, and Fred Zinnemann was nominated as well. It lost, however, to The Greatest Show on Earth. How many people think it should have lost to that? That's a whole other story. Nevertheless, High Noon, made in 32 days on a shoestring budget, has a lot of story to tell, and we're going to tell the story immediately afterwards, after you see the movie. But I'm so excited here to be able to lead into it and present it. So without further ado, here, almost Well, not quite high noon, but close enough. Here is high noon. All right. So happy to welcome here to USC three extraordinary panelists that we're going to have to talk about this film and Gary Cooper. And first up, we mentioned him earlier. He wrote this book, High Noon, The Hollywood Blacklist and the Making of an American Classic. He wrote The Searchers. He wrote a new one called Shooting Midnight Cowboy. And if you think there's a Western theme, Shooting Midnight Cowboy is not exactly a Western. But extraordinary books on the making of these movies and the meaning of these movies. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, was with the Washington Post, won the National Jewish Book Award, and taught journalism at Stanford, many other things in his career. Please welcome Glenn Frankel. Hello, Glenn. Have a seat. All right. And she, in addition to being the daughter of Carl Foreman, the screenwriter here, and associate producer, as you saw the credits, is a biographer and historian in her own right. She's written Georgina, Duchess of Devonshire, A World on Fire, The World Made by Women, in documentary, The Ascent of Woman, and a Wall Street Journal columnist, and many other things. Please welcome Amanda Foreman. Hi, Amanda. Grab your mic, that's important. And the reason we're all here, I think, right next door is a brand new exhibit of on Gary Cooper's career, and so many artifacts. You have to go take a look at it. It's going to be here, I believe, for about 6 months. And I know Dean Daly has been working for a long time to bring this together. So thank you for doing that and making this possible. And so you have to check that out. She has written the book, Gary Cooper Off Camera, A Daughter Remembers, which she'll be signing here. And I think Glenn will be signing his book here at this Festival of Books. And she is the keeper of the flame, keeper of Gary Cooper's career and keeping it alive 70 years after High Noon was made, celebrating its 70th anniversary, and of course so much before. So please welcome Maria Cooper-Janis.
Thank you very much.
Hi, how are you? Have a seat right there. Everybody have a seat. And welcome here. Maria, I believe you just came from across town in Hollywood at the TCM Film Festival, which I've been at this weekend here, where High Noon was also showing today.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, it's on.
Yes, I did. For the first time, I put my hands in my father's handprints on the Grauman's Chinese.
Did you really? You'd never done that?
Never done that before.
What was that like?
Lovely.
I have to start with you because I have to ask you what this means to have this exhibit, to have all of this kind of celebration of your father at this time. And it's been a long time coming, I know, and your book's a beautiful book as well. So talk about that and how it came about here.
Well, thank you. I really sort of thought long and hard about where I wanted my father's archives to be, as I'm his only child, and you know, we're all getting younger. So, anyway, when I visited here and I checked, I had seen some other places, possible places who wanted them, of course. This for me was just a no-brainer. I mean, this is where I just knew my father's personal archives, his. Not only books and papers and photographs, but the Indian jackets that he made from leather himself, and his shoes and rocking horse that he had made for me. My first little horse was a rocking horse. All those kind of personal things, as well as his professional accoutrements. This, for me, was the perfect place. When I visited it, the School of Cinematic Arts was just such an exciting, dynamic place. There was so much energy. There was so much wonderful feeling of creativity and a place where the whole art and science of film would be carried forward, into the future. And as part of that, of course, I wanted an enduring legacy as well, other than just material objects. And we have been able to establish, through the help of Dean Daly and wonderful people here at USC, a Gary Cooper endowment for Native American and indigenous peoples students.
Yes, you should applaud that, but that's very important to Gary Cooper in his life, indigenous people and
Completely important. I mean, really, I think always next to his bed were books about Native Americans and about American history. And he, because really he grew up in Montana in 1901. So the Helena, Montana in the early 1900s was pretty rough and tumble. And the kids he went to school, but his first friends were the Native American children. And they taught him. They taught him, I think, probably really his love of nature. They taught him how to track game. Their spirituality, their love of the earth. Thou shalt not foul thy own nest, which I think we need a little more history about there. The whole thing, it really imbued his life throughout it. He never lost touch with that part of his roots. So it seemed to me just a natural thing that would make him happy and be fulfilling for him to know that peoples that he loved and respected would be able to take their own history and their culture, and of course storytelling being one of the important aspects of indigenous life, to be able to translate it into all the wonderful opportunities that film, media, video games, whatever is going to be possible now in this day and age.
The power of film. I think the actual last, the last thing he did was a documentary called The Real West, right? That was the last film that he was involved in as a narrator, right?
It was the last thing he did. He was already very ill with cancer at the time, and he was in a lot of pain, and he said, nothing's going to stop me from doing that. He had a tank of oxygen in his dressing room, and he would, take a few swigs and go out and shoot the scene. And of course, those were the days, I must say. He did it. It was made for NBC, a series called Project 20 in those days. A wonderful producer named Donald Hyatt, who did, I think, not Victory at Sea. He did a very important series. And I remember talking to Don Hyatt subsequently, and he said, Coop and I, we got along really well. And he said, in the early days of getting this all put together, we never had a contract. It was on a handshake, and that was it. So those were the days when a man's handshake was his honorable bond. And that was my father, that was Don, and different times. Different times.
It's amazing. My mic's not on, guys, so I'm going to project here. Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I can project. Oh, it is now? Okay, great. So you were on the set of High Noon too, I believe, right?
Yes, and I didn't even get to ride a horse. I was very... Yeah,
like Beau Bridges there, ruining takes and things. You didn't do any of that, huh?
No, No, I was on the set. I was on the set the day of the wedding scene when he marries Grace Kelly, Amy. And as I was telling a friend the other night, I never realized how good an actor he was, because the night before, my father had a chronic bad back, and he put it out. Anyone who has back trouble will know how painful that can be. And in the wedding scene, he gets married. He goes into another room with the judge and his best man. And he has to pick up his happy, blushing bride and put her up on a quite large highboy or a bureau. I guess you've just seen the scene. And to lift Grace Kelly was not easy. It was not easy at best. It was pleasurable, I'm sure. But she wasn't a dancer, and she didn't know how to sort of help. And he was in such pain. And of course, many retakes. And I could see the sweat break out on his upper lip from pain. And they had to do it again and again and again. And he just looked like the happy bridegroom, and everybody was, cheering along, and the scene was finally shot. But I thought, boy, that's really acting to hide your own agony.
Yeah. And Grace Kelly, right at the beginning of her short motion picture career here, that was an early thing, and then 4 years later, she made her last film, but won an Oscar in the meantime, and what a career. And it was such a lovely performance here in this film.
Yes, it was beautiful. And I remember, Fred Zinnemann saying to my father how innocent she was as an actress, and that simplicity, as she was supposed to be a Quaker, peace-loving character, it just all worked to her benefit, because she didn't really have to act that much. It was very naturally her.
Yeah. I think all the acting in this was natural. Boy, and when you look at all the actors, I spot Harry Morgan, other people that are just in this, which is just great. Is this one of your favorite movies of your father's? Your favorite? Or, where does it stand in your opinion?
I maybe got on 5 fingers favorites, but this is certainly at the top of the list.
Yeah. It's...
I think it was my father. No, I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He never really said, this is my favorite film. But I know it touched him greatly, and I think it answered his criteria for someone who had asked him, what makes you choose the roles you choose? And he said, I want to portray the best a man can be. And if you look at the decisions that the marshal has to make from the beginning scene when he's taking off with his new bride and love, and then he knows his conscience tells him he has to go back. I think it's throughout the film that exposes his character, his sensitivity, his vulnerability. He's not afraid to cry. I mean, I think that was quite unusual for the hero, wasn't it?
It's unheard. I mean, and when you look at it, there are so many ways that audiences can read into this film now. I'm even looking at and thinking of Ukraine when I'm watching it again today, and there's so many things that it was way ahead of its time. And of its time as it was making. I did a little bit of an intro here to it before the film started and talked about the blacklist. And of course, Glenn, you have written this book and you've got it on the title, The Hollywood Blacklist and the Making of an American Classic. So what was your way in and what was your thoughts about writing about High Noon here?
I enjoyed High Noon as a kid very much. And when I started writing movie books, I was looking for movies that hadn't been written about endlessly, of course. That's one of the first questions. But for me, having come from a journalism background, I worked at the Washington Post for 27 years. I wasn't a movie book writer. I wanted to write about, and what I discovered is that movies really, good movies like this one, really are a looking glass into the historical era they were made in. Sorry. Okay, let's try this. That great movies reflect the historical era they were made in, and they're a wonderful looking glass into history. I mean, so many ways you can approach history, but a movie really tells you a lot, whether it means to or not. And it also tells us a lot about our own time, and that's the amazing thing about High Noon, is, as you've mentioned before, I mean, its resonance over the years it's about reluctant courage. I mean, the marshal doesn't want to face these 4 young armed killers. He's trying to figure out how to get out of it. He goes and tries. The whole reason he's storming through town is to, mobilize a community to work with him to stop this. And that sense of reluctant courage is something that was very appealing at the time and still is. And it reflects also, screenwriter of High Noon, as you pointed out, Pete, before the movie began, it's Carl Foreman, who worked in a small indie movie-making company with Stanley Kramer, a good friend and business partner, and a bunch of other people. And they were making socially conscious movies at the time. And in the middle of the film shoot, Carl Foreman is called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee about his former membership in the Communist Party. And he knows it's not going to be enough just to tell them, yes, I was once in the Communist Party, big mistake, I'm very sorry. He was going to have to go a lot further than that, and ultimately under this sort of inquisition process, which was more they already knew the names of people who were in the Communist Party. They had the FBI files, lots of things. But if you were going to redeem yourself and continue to work in Hollywood, you had to name names, the people who were in the party with you, of your friends, of anyone who, could be deemed as subversive. And for Carl Foreman, he didn't want to appear before the committee. He didn't want to be a martyr either. He's in the middle of a very successful screenwriting career. He'd already been nominated twice for Academy Awards for Best Screenplay. And he would be nominated a third time for High Noon, but he just couldn't do it. It's, and it's not quite the same as Gary Cooper in the sense that when they ask, the marshal, he says, well, if you don't know, I can't explain it to you. And interesting, incidentally, that Helen Ramirez, his former lover, echoes that same question. If you don't understand it, I can't explain it to you. Well, Carl was a very articulate man. He could explain it very well. It was just a bridge too far. And while he didn't want to be a martyr, he really didn't feel he had a choice. And when the day came in the middle of the film shoot in downtown LA in the Federal Building where he has to appear before the committee, he can't name names. He says that he is not a member of the Communist Party at that point in September 1951. But other than that, he takes the Fifth Amendment. He knows what's going to happen, and it does. He loses his job, his position with the Stanley Kramer Company. It's a moment when business partners and friends walk away from him in a way that's very similar to what happens to the marshal in the movie. So this gave me so much of what I was looking for. It's not only a great movie, but it reflects that moment, and in a lot of ways it reflects our moment today too, I think. Ask Kevin McCarthy.
That's what I said in my intro. I am astounded every time I see this film, and I saw it 2 weeks ago, and then I saw it again, and I see new things in it right now, about how timely it is, Amanda. I mean, you were not born at this time. I believe, if I can just say, I think you were born around the end of the 60s or something.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So quite removed from the making. You weren't on the set, in other words, of High Noon. And born, Carl Foreman, after all of this, moved to London and stayed there for, 25 years or so? Yeah. So he basically left the country and did his career from there. But for you, what was this? What did he say? I mean, what did he say about this film, about that time? What did you learn as a teenager, basically?
So my father always used to say that when he made High Noon, it was a bizarre case of art imitating life and life imitating art. That as Glenn has said and has written in his wonderful book, that my father was facing the greatest question and test of his life, not just his career, but of his morals and his values as a human being. He was writing about this and seeing it unfold on set. High Noon is a love letter to America. And the reason why my father felt so particularly proud of this film is because he wanted to marry two genres, and he wanted to make a timeless film. So if you think about what you're watching, first of all, it is utterly classical in its approach to drama. It is totally Aristotelian. It obeys the unity of time and space. The second thing is that the lead character, Marshall Kane, doesn't change as a human being, which is utterly Greek in its concept of tragedy. Kane is who he is. He's put through a set of impossible situations and demands, and the great test is how he will come out of it, not changed, but to remain himself, a man of honor. But second, he then wanted to marry that Greek classical tradition to a second one, which is the American literary tradition, starting with Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter. And what you see in that film is a combination of The Scarlet Letter and Mark Twain, the man who corrupted Hadleyburg. If you notice that the town is called Hadleyville, that is a very direct reference. So it's taking one art form, marrying it to a theme about, the sorrow and the pity to see our shining city on the hill corrupted thus. And then he set it in a 20th century drama of the Western. And by combining all those three things, he was able to make something that was both timeless and timely, which is why it works today. It's why High Noon was referenced in 1989 in Poland with the Solidarity posters that featured Gary Cooper walking along, not holding a gun, but holding the ballot box, holding a ballot paper. And it's why, if you look on Twitter right now, you see a lot of references by Ukrainians to High Noon. And it's not just because Dmitry Chomkin, who wrote the music, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, was Ukrainian. And I heard from Maria that the music itself is based on an old Ukrainian folk song, which is absolutely extraordinary. But my own father, funnily enough, was 100% ethnically Ukrainian. His own parents were Ukrainian refugees who came over here in 1903. So that makes me weirdly half Ukrainian. But there is this sense in that film of the outsider, the human being on the margins of society who goes into the center of society, but never loses that sense of being on the outside, which is what Kane is. He never quite belongs, ever. But by not belonging, he loves that town all the more. It's what Rudyard Kipling said. He said, what do they know of England who only England know? And it takes an outsider sometimes to really love and understand their adopted country.
Yeah. Fascinating. When I said Ukrainian, I had no idea it was that close. Wow. That's pretty amazing. Glenn, this was shot, it's unusual. When you look at this picture, it unfolds in real time. We're constantly looking at that clock and seeing how close it is to noon, and that's essentially the running time. This movie's about 85 minutes or something. It's very tight. I can see why this won the Oscar for film editing. Elmo Williams did a sensational job of keeping that pace and picking the right shots here. Obviously, Zinnemann is a director, too, and Carl Foreman is writer, because I believe all that was in the screenplay with the clocks, right?
Oh, very much so. There was this terrible controversy that existed for years and years. A lot of film critics used to like to write, and I have no idea why, well, the whole idea for the clocks was inserted afterwards. And finally, Lionel Chetwynd made a documentary in which he literally just took out the shots of all the various people looking at clocks and said, well, if the whole idea was inserted after, then what are these people looking at? So yes, it was embedded in the script.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Carl Foreman was very much interested in using this technique of real time, and of course it's not exactly accurate. The movie is, I think, 84 minutes. Cooper looks at the first clock, the Marshall, and it's 20 minutes to 11 already, so he's got 80 minutes from there. So they fudge it a bit, but the idea of real-time rope, Hitchcock's Rope with Jimmy Stewart is an example of this, and Foreman was very influenced by that. But it's great to see this thing on a big screen, isn't it? Because you really see, you see the close-ups are judicious; they're not constant, but you see them, and they're so meaningful right from the beginning. It took them a while to figure out the beginning of the movie. Carl Foreman, at one point he starts it with a deserted. One of the screenplays started with a deserted town after all this has happened, but he comes eventually to realize that let's kick it off with the change, with the thing that's about to change. And it's these three gunmen, lining up, who ride their own horses, three wonderful Western actors, incidentally, who go on to make all kinds, Robert Wilkie and Lee Van Cleef, and the great Sheb Woolley, who's in Rawhide after that, not to mention singing the one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. That's
oh, that's right. Yeah.
In the late 50s as a country western singer. I mean, they're extraordinary, and it just sort of kicks off the thing. It's kind of the anti-Western, though, in the way it looks. It's got this documentary feel. Fred Zinnemann and Floyd Crosby were actually looking at photographs from the Civil War, Matthew Brady photographs. And, it's gritty. Gary Cooper looks his age. He's 50 years old when he makes this movie. He actually looks, I think, a bit older than that. It's a very brave performance in all kinds of ways, but one is just that he allows himself to be filmed. And the amount of glycerin they use to make everybody look sweaty is extraordinary. It doesn't have beautiful landscapes. It doesn't have, it's not in color. It doesn't have cowboy and Indian battles, or doesn't even have any gun violence until the last scene. It is a very different kind of Western, and it got some grief from some critics over that. It's a social drama in a way that has a lot of meaning. Carl had never written a Western before. Fred Zinnemann had never directed one. But here they are, and they created a classic Western, one of the very, very best. And because it resonates in so many ways and has so many wonderful characters, not to mention including those two wonderful women, and the way they are written and the way they interact with each other. I mean, it's just both really ahead of its time and yet just an enduring notion of what you could do with cinema in 1951.
Yeah, both Katie Hirata, who's wonderful in it. I mean, just the silences on her face when Frank Miller gets off that train tells you everything. You don't need any dialogue. You don't need anything. It's all there. And Grace Kelly, I loved her speech about being a Quaker and the guns and things. That's also very pertinent right now. But then, she has to come to the party, as it were, in her own mind, too, when the first shot goes off. He mentioned Westerns, that Zinnemann had never made a Western. Carl Foreman had never written a Western. I don't believe Stanley Kramer had made any Westerns. All the people behind this really were new to this format, but Gary Cooper had made Westerns. What was it about the Western format right into the silent era where he began, making one after another, and then, classics, Westerner, all the way to the end of his career? A movie I saw at the Village Theater, Westwood. I'm sorry, Dean Daly. I know that's where UCLA is, but I saw it. I remember seeing it with my father, who loved Gary Cooper, loved Westerns, and we saw Man of the West, Anthony Mann's great Western that he did in '58, right at the end of his career. He was always true to this genre.
Well, he was true to the Western genre because it was how he grew up. I mean, his father was a Montana State Supreme Court judge living in Helena, but then they had a ranch about 2 hours north. So his life was horses and riding and cattle, and he used to comment how he admired his mother, seeing her up at 4:30 in the morning with an axe, breaking up the ice in the buckets so the cattle could have water to drink. And that sort of impressed him a lot with the ruggedness of what really life was like. Not a soft, cushy dude ranch kind of a thing. And he credited his ability to transit from silent pictures to talkies because he said, I developed this great ability to be able to call in the hogs and the cattle with just with just my voice, to reach to the third pasture away. And many of his colleagues, wonderful actors of the silent screen, the voices didn't
translate. Yeah. Well, Singing in the Rain is, a fictional version of that as well. But yeah, he made some amazing. Of course, you know, you want to look at everything Gary Cooper did, and the variety in his career. Meet John Doe, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Bo Jess, The Westerner, Sergeant York, Ball of Fire, hilarious. Pride of the Yankees, For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Fountainhead was an amazing movie. The Hanging Tree. Friendly Persuasion with Audrey Hepburn, Love in the Afternoon. Along Came Jones, one of my personal favorites. I mean, you could go on and on.
Yeah. Well, it was. He loved nature. He loved horses. He loved riding, and in actual fact, the way he learned to ride so well was the result of an accident that he had. He was riding with a boyhood friend who had polio, and the friend's little Model T Ford, whatever car was it then. Well, at 1910, it had hand shifts because the boy was paralyzed from the waist down. And Helena, as a town, was very hilly. And he flipped the car over. My father got thrown out, fractured his hip very badly, never went to a doctor. He just got back on a horse and rode. I think he spent about 2 weeks immobile, but then he just got on the horse and started riding. And at one point, many years later, the doctor looked at an X-ray and he said, "My God, you've got the Grand Canyon there in between the bones of your hip." But he learned to ride a horse so it wouldn't cause him pain. So there was no bouncing, there was no anything. So he learned how to stick a horse either bareback or on the saddle, and that also gave him his distinctive walk, because there was sort of a Gary Cooper stride.
Yeah.
And a walk, and that really was the result of an injury, but it worked toward his to his benefit.
I'll say, yeah. You have the Oscars in this exhibit?
Yes, there is there's the High Noon Oscar, which I hope you'll have a chance to look at.
Yeah.
And there's the Sergeant York Oscar,
Wow.
when he portrayed Alvin York, the wonderful World War I hero.
So great.
And you'll notice a difference in the size of the two statues, because Alvin York's Oscar was made during the war, and they were cutting back on the use of precious metals for war.
Oh, right. Yes, they changed the Oscar all during the war there. Yeah.
So it's lower. I think the statue itself is the same size, and it's interesting. It's another member of our family, but my great uncle was a man named Cedric Gibbons, who was the art director of MGM for 36 years. Cedric Gibbons was the man who designed Oscar. And it was literally designed on a cocktail napkin at the old Ciro's restaurant up on the strip.
It's amazing. He also got, unusually after you win 2 Best Actor Oscars, the Academy doesn't give you another one just to give you one, but they gave him an honorary Oscar to show the importance of Gary Cooper's career, which he received about a month before he died, I believe, right?
Yes, that was a Life Achievement Award,
Yeah.
which meant so much to him, and I think he expressed that. There was a wonderful testimonial dinner at the Friars Club, and he was really so moved and touched, and Billy... Oh, Billy, hello?
Okay.
Billy Wilder, the wonderful director who made Love in the Afternoon. Can you hear me? No.
Billy Wilder, Love in the Afternoon.
Yeah, he actually helped my father write what he wanted to say at that Friars Club dinner. And then when the Motion Picture Academy gave him his honorary award, he wasn't well enough to go, but Jimmy Stewart picked it up for him. And then Jimmy brought it over to the house, and it was very
You got
emotional.
it. Yeah, that was very emotional. Yeah, Jimmy Stewart actually started tearing up, I believe, during that. Yeah. Okay, I got a signal that we just have a few minutes, but we did want to get any questions that you have from the audience. Yes, sir, right there.
Hi, it's a real honor and pleasure to meet you. I've seen practically all the movies you talked about, but there was a movie I heard from TCM that was talking about a story concerning the Phasman, where he was being directed by Cecily DeMille, and one of the actors was Anthony Quinn. He played an Indian.
Yes, he did.
You familiar with what he told Cecily DeMille? This is from TCM.
Help me.
No, he said to Sesame DeMille, Indians don't do that, right? His love for indigenous people. Because Anthony Quinn was asking him, he said, you know, Indians don't do that. And he said, well, you're an actor and you do what I say because I'm the director. And
I never knew that
your dad
story.
stepped in and he said, you know, Mr. DeMille, he has a good point. Indians don't do that. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much. I remember
Great
that.
story. Wow. Cool. Anybody else out there have anything?
Story.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It wasn't DeMille, I think it was Sam Goldman, who early on in his career said to my father, never let your public down. And I think there were several roles that my father wanted to take and he turned me down because it was not that he always had to be the hero, but there had to be an integrity in his character. And the last film my father made, unfortunately, you know, and any creative person, you want to stretch, you want to try something new. It was a movie called The Naked Edge
Sure, with Deborah Carr.
with Deborah Carr. And the whole point of the film is you, the audience sitting there, had to believe until the last 3 minutes that he was a murderer. And the audience didn't buy it.
He was a murderer.
It sank in the box office.
It's funny. It was advertised at the time as from the writer of Psycho, Robert Bloch, and they had a gimmick. I remember on that movie, a red light goes off and you can't go in the theater, and when the red light's going off in The Naked Edge, I mean, they tried everything they could to sell it without Gary Cooper, but obviously you need Gary Cooper.
To be Gary Cooper.
Yeah, to be Gary Cooper, as you said. Yes, sir, right there.
Are there any scenes scripted and shot that are not in the movie?
Any scenes that aren't
Yes,
in the
actually there was a whole sort of subplot that had 3 scenes involving another deputy who had gone out to capture a fugitive and captures the fugitive, and because it takes a while to do, and he knows he's not going to get back to the wedding in time, so he takes another night off and he goes to a small cantina where an old girlfriend of his, and he spends the night there with the capture, and there are 3 moments that they were all filmed. In fact, the last surviving cast member of High Noon was a woman named Roberta Haynes, who was the woman in the cantina. Roberta was a Jewish woman from Brooklyn, but she had a darker skin and curly hair, so she often played, she told me, Mexican Americans and other ethnic figures. She says all 3 scenes were shot, but Fred Zinnemann, who did film it, always felt that was slowing down the narrative. And so at some point the decision was made not to use them. But there was a deputy, I forget who played him, and Roberta Haynes, and a bad guy who's overcome and taken in. And one moment in the bar scene, and I can't recall this exactly, but they say, well, he's got 2 deputies, or he had 2 deputies, because there originally in Carl Foreman's script there were 2 deputies. There was the Lloyd Bridges figure, the unfaithful deputy, and there was the faithful deputy, but who couldn't get back in time to help out his boss.
Can I ask you, Glenn, too? Apparently it had a kind of disastrous preview, an initial cut, and some of it had to do with the song because it was used a lot more in the original cut. Is that right? That it was toned down?
Well, Stanley Kramer loved the song. And loved it so much that he seeded it throughout the movie at great length, apparently. And that came in, and the audience, I forget if this was, there were 2 previews, one was in Pasadena or somewhere else. The audience was chuckling after a while because they were getting so much of the song. I mean, the song is crucial. The marshal can't tell you, every time the marshals ask, well, what are you going to do? Well, why are you doing this? He can't really explain it, and he can't explain it, of course, to his new bride. I always say that if she'd been able to listen to the song, which is, it's the Marshal explaining to her, "Do not forsake me, oh my darling," and I've got to go out and kill Frank Miller, and this is why, and it's so articulate, but. So the song really is crucial to the movie, and and not only that, it was crucial to the box office success because it was released in various versions before the movie came out. A few months before, there was a Frankie Lane version that was a big hit. There was Tex Ritter's original, which came out. Originally they weren't going to record it for a 45, but once Frankie Lane's took off, they did. And the song did very, very well, and that had helped attract an audience to the movie and got it going. But yes. Originally, Stanley Kramer had it all the way through. He pulled bits out at this point.
Toned it down.
Toned it down a bit, but still,
I have a massive soundtrack collection, and somebody put out a CD, and I have it. There's about 25. It's just the song by 25 people. You can just listen to it over and over by all these people. It's fascinating. But there's a whole history of people, with songs almost getting cut from movies, though. Like Moon River, they wanted to toss that after a preview in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Over the Rainbow, the most famous example, Louis B. Mayer allegedly said, "Get that song out of my movie," and so you never know. Thank God they saved "Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling." Okay, well all right. Yes. Oh, you're just stretching. Okay.
Can I make a point with something? I think something, I don't know, 'cause it's a scene. It impresses me very much, and I think it goes by so quickly. I don't know how often people catch it, and I think it's your father's writing, which I think actually sums up the whole picture. At the very end, Frank Miller. It's a standoff between Frank Miller and the Marshal, and Marshal Kane has a chance to shoot Frank Miller in the back and be safe himself. And the Marshal doesn't. He calls out Miller's name, and Miller turns around, and then it's a shootout. Who can draw faster? And of course, the Marshal kills Frank Miller, but that he doesn't shoot a man in the back. And that whole thought that your father put in the picture for me almost sums up the picture, because it sums up the moral code that.
Yes, I agree with you, Maria. But there is a very strong message in this film. There are four horsemen of the apocalypse coming in.
Oh wow! Yeah.
It's death, it's war, it's pestilence, and it's famine. Now, these four horsemen come in, and what are they doing? Number one, they are causing the town to lose its own ideals. So that's the first message, is that democracy is fragile and must be protected from within. And then the second message is that you have to prevent unchecked aggression, which is what Frank Miller represents. And that message was right from the beginning, because my father thought of this film right after the war. He's seen what unchecked aggression can do. And then the blacklist brought in that other message about democracy being fragile from within.
Fascinating. There's so much in it. I have to also, you mentioned Stanley Kramer. Before we go, I just want to mention in our audience is Mrs. Stanley Kramer and Stanley Kramer's daughter right back there. So, and I want to thank you all for coming, because check out the exhibit. There's going to be book signings here as well, and you've got to have these books. They're really beautiful, too. So thank you all for coming, and it'll continue on out there with the book signing and the exhibit. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.